The morning sun painted Haven's Edge in shades of gold and green. Tay walked through the forest path toward the dig site, his boots crunching on fallen leaves. At 28 years old, he had spent most of his life studying the architects, that mysterious ancient race that vanished 50,000 years ago. Today felt different somehow. The air seemed to hum with anticipation. "Tay, wait up!" Hannah called from behind him, jogging to catch up. Her dark hair was tied back, and she carried a scanning device under one arm. "Did you hear? The Concordance ships arrived last night. 3 of them." Tay nodded. The Galactic Concordance rarely visited Haven's Edge. His people, all 50,000 humans living on this remote world, preferred their quiet existence. They had achieved spaceflight 200 years ago, but chose not to expand into the galaxy like other species did. Haven's Edge was enough. "Dr. Mira wants everyone at the main excavation site," Hannah continued. "Something big is happening." When they arrived, Tay saw his mentor already there. Dr. Mira Han stood beside several alien visitors. There was Velthari, a tall reptilian creature with green scales and golden eyes. Next to her stood Own, an insectoid being whose multiple arms gestured excitedly as he examined the ruins. The ruins themselves were impressive. Massive stone pillars rose from the earth, covered in symbols nobody could read. The architects had built similar structures on hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. They were all that remained of a civilization that once seemed godlike in their power and knowledge. Tay," Dr. Mira called out. "Come here. Velthari has been telling me about their findings on other architect sites." Velthari turned her golden eyes toward Tay. "Your species is fortunate to live near such pristine ruins. Most architect sites have been picked clean by scavengers over the millennia. But this one," she gestured at the pillars, "this one has something we have never seen before. Our scanners detected a massive structure underground. An archive, we believe." "An archive?" Tay felt his heart race. "You mean a place where they stored information?" "Precisely," Own clicked in his translated speech. "If we can access it, we might finally understand who the architects were and why they disappeared." The team spent the next 3 days carefully excavating the entrance. Tay barely slept, too excited by the possibility of finally learning the truth about the ancient race he had studied all his life. Hannah worked alongside him, her engineering skills helping to move tons of earth without damaging the structure beneath. On the 4th day, they broke through. A doorway emerged from the soil, perfectly preserved despite its age. The material gleamed like metal but felt warm to the touch. Symbols covered every surface, flowing in patterns that seemed almost alive. "Remarkable," Velthari whispered. "The preservation is perfect. It is as if they sealed this place yesterday." Dr. Mira approached the doorway cautiously. "Can we open it?" Own scanned the entrance with various devices. "There appears to be some kind of locking mechanism. It requires a specific activation sequence, possibly biometric." "Biometric?" Ambassador Quan had arrived, his gray hair and weathered face showing his 52 years. As leader of the human colony, he wanted to witness this moment. "You mean it reads biological signatures?" "Correct," Own confirmed. "But we have no idea what species the architects were. Their remains have never been found." Tay stepped closer to examine the symbols. Something about them felt familiar, though he could not explain why. His hand reached out almost without thinking, fingers tracing the carved patterns on the door's surface. The moment his skin touched the metal, everything changed. Light exploded from the doorway. Tay jerked his hand back, but it was too late. The symbols began glowing bright blue, spreading across the entire structure like fire racing through dry grass. The ground trembled. Ancient machinery hummed to life deep underground, systems that had slept for 50,000 years suddenly awakening. "What did you do?" Velthari shouted. but her voice was drowned out by the rising sound of the archive powering up. The doorway slid open smoothly, revealing a vast chamber beyond. Holographic displays flickered into existence, showing star maps, mathematical equations, and images of cities that must have been magnificent before they fell to ruins. At the center of the chamber stood a platform with a control panel covered in more glowing symbols. But what shocked everyone into silence was the language. The symbols were changing, shifting before their eyes, transforming into something readable. Tay could read them. He could read the ancient architect language as easily as his native tongue. "This cannot be," Velthari breathed. "How are you reading that?" I don't know," Tay admitted. But it was more than just reading. He understood. The knowledge flowed into his mind like water filling an empty cup. It says this is Archive Site Prime, the last repository of... He paused, his face going pale. "No, that's impossible." "What does it say?" Dr. Mira demanded. Tay's voice shook as he spoke. "The last repository of human knowledge. It says this archive was created by humanity 50,000 years ago." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "Preposterous," Owen clicked. "Humans are a recent emergent species. You achieved spaceflight only 2 centuries ago. You cannot possibly be..." "The architects," Velthari finished, her golden eyes wide with shock. "The humans are the architects." Ambassador Quan stepped forward, his face unreadable. "That cannot be true. Our history, our records, they only go back a few thousand years. We have no memory of any ancient civilization." But Tay was walking toward the central platform, drawn by something he could not resist. The control panel responded to his approach, more displays activating around him. He saw images now, holographic recordings of people who looked exactly like humans. They wore strange clothes and lived in cities of glass and light, but their faces, their bodies, everything about them was human. "The genetic markers match," Owen reported, his scanners working frantically. "The architectural signatures, the mathematical systems, even the base language structure, it is all human. The architects were human. The greatest civilization in galactic history was built by humanity." Dr. Mira sat down heavily on a piece of rubble, her face stunned. "But how? Why don't we remember? What happened to us?" Tay touched the control panel and the archive responded. More information flooded through the connection, making his head spin. "There's more. So much more. The archive it's broadcasting something. A signal." "Broadcasting where?" Ambassador Quan asked. Tay looked up at them, his expression filled with awe and fear. "Everywhere. To every architect site in the galaxy. We just woke something up. Something that has been waiting 50,000 years for humans to find it again." The chamber's lights pulsed brighter, and somewhere in the depths of the archive, something ancient stirred. The truth about humanity's past was beginning to emerge from the darkness, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days had passed since the archive awakened, and Haven's Edge had become the center of galactic attention. Dozens of ships filled the orbit above the planet, bringing representatives from hundreds of species. The quiet human colony was suddenly thrust onto the greatest stage in the galaxy. Inside the settlement's main hall, the emergency summit was reaching its peak. High Chancellor Raxel stood at the center, his crystalline body refracting light into rainbow patterns across the walls. His voice resonated like crystal bells. "We must understand what this means. If humans are truly the architects, then everything we know about galactic history must be reconsidered." Commander Jin stood near the doorway, his hand never far from his weapon. At 38, he had spent his entire career keeping Haven's Edge safe from the few pirates and criminals who ventured this far from civilized space. Now he faced something far more dangerous: fear. He could see it in the eyes of the alien delegates. They were afraid of humans. Dr. Yuna sat at a terminal, genetic data scrolling across her screen. The young scientist had barely slept since the discovery, running test after test. "The evidence is undeniable," she said, her voice tired but firm. "Human DNA contains markers that match material found at every architect site. We're not just related to the architects. We are them." "But how did this happen?" Ambassador Kwan asked. He stood beside Dr. Mira, both of them trying to process the impossible truth. "How did we forget everything? 50,000 years of history just gone." Tay had spent the last 3 days inside the archive, interfacing with systems that responded only to him. The knowledge was overwhelming, but piece by piece he was assembling the truth. Now he stood before the summit, ready to share what he had learned. "They did it to themselves," Tay began, his voice quiet but clear. "Our ancestors, the ancient humans, they didn't disappear. They destroyed themselves." The hall fell silent. Every eye turned toward him. "The archive contains records of what happened," Tay continued. 50,000 years ago, humanity had reached a level of technology that seems almost magical to us now. They could manipulate matter at the quantum level. They could fold space and time. They had begun experimenting with barriers between dimensions. They were becoming gods. "So what happened?" Velthari asked. She had remained on Haven's edge, fascinated by the unfolding mystery. "War," Tay said simply. "A war that lasted 300 years and killed 99% of all humans. Not a war over resources or territory. A war over ideology." He activated a holographic display showing images from the archive. Cities burning, planets cracking apart, weapons that bent reality itself being used against fellow humans. "One faction believed in unlimited advancement," Tay explained. "They thought humanity should push forward regardless of the cost or danger. The other faction believed some knowledge was too dangerous to pursue. They wanted limits, safeguards, restrictions. Neither side would compromise. Both sides had weapons that could destroy worlds." Dr. Yuna looked sick. "They had all that power and they used it to kill each other?" "Worse," Tay said. "They made deliberate choices to escalate. Each side convinced themselves that total victory was the only acceptable outcome. They would rather destroy everything than admit they were wrong." Hana stood up, her face pale. "But some survived, obviously since we're here." "A few thousand," Tay confirmed. "They fled to Haven's Edge, as far from the war as they could get, and they made a decision. They called it the Great Forgetting." Ambassador Kwan leaned forward. "They erased their own memories?" "More than that," Tay said. "They destroyed all their technology. They burned their libraries. They altered their own genetics to suppress the knowledge stored in their DNA. They wanted their children to start fresh, without the burden of their failure. Without the temptation of godlike power." "That's insane," Commander Jin said. "That's desperate," Dr. Mira corrected. "They were so horrified by what they had done, so afraid their descendants would repeat their mistakes, that they chose to forget everything. They chose to become primitive again." Tay nodded. "The archive contains a message from the last leaders of ancient humanity. They explain their reasoning. They say that their civilization had become too powerful too quickly. Their technology advanced faster than their wisdom. They had the power of gods, but the minds of children, and it destroyed them." High Chancellor Raxel's crystalline form seemed to dim. "This changes everything. The architects, humanity, they were not destroyed by some external force or natural disaster. They committed suicide." "But that's not the whole story," Yuna said, looking up from her terminal. "I've been analyzing the genetic modifications they made. They didn't just suppress knowledge, they enhanced certain traits. Look at this." She displayed her findings. Human genetics showed deliberate modifications that increased resilience, adaptability, and problem-solving skills. Traits that would help a primitive species survive and slowly rebuild. They designed us, Hana breathed. Modern humans were designed by ancient humans to be better. Not better, Tay corrected. Different. They removed the drives that led to the war, extreme ambition, ruthless competition, the need to dominate. They kept the good parts, curiosity, cooperation, empathy. They tried to create a version of humanity that could have power without being corrupted by it. That is terrifying, Velthari said. Your ancestors had the knowledge to reshape their own species. What else could they do? The question hung in the air, and Tay saw the fear spreading. The alien delegates were whispering among themselves now, casting nervous glances at the humans present. General Korvax, a massive insectoid warrior, stood up. His mandibles clicked as he spoke. This information must be contained. If humanity regains access to architect technology, they could threaten the entire galaxy. We cannot allow that to happen. We're not a threat, Ambassador Quan said firmly. We've lived peacefully for 200 years. We have no desire to— You have no desire now, Korvax interrupted. But what about when you remember more? When you access your ancestors' weapons? Your people nearly destroyed the galaxy once. We cannot risk it happening again. Commander Jin's hand moved to his weapon. Around the room, other security forces tensed. The summit was on the edge of violence. Wait, Hana said suddenly. Everyone wait. Tay, what else did the archive say? There must be more. Tay hesitated. There is. The archive contains a test, a trial designed by the last architects specifically for their descendants. They knew that someday humans might rediscover their past. They wanted to be sure that modern humanity had learned the lessons that ancient humanity died to teach. What kind of test? Dr. Mira asked. A test of wisdom, Tay said. The archive will grant access to architect knowledge, but only if modern humans can prove they won't repeat the same mistakes. If we fail— He paused. If we fail, the archive will seal itself forever. Or worse. Worse how? Ambassador Quan demanded. Tay's face was grim. The ancient humans installed fail-safes. If their descendants prove to be just as dangerous as they were, the archive will activate weapons designed to destroy Haven's Edge completely. They loved their children enough to give them a chance, but they loved the galaxy enough to ensure that humanity would never threaten it again. The hall erupted in shouting. Some called for the test to begin immediately. Others demanded the archive be destroyed before it could activate its weapons. A few suggested evacuating all humans from Haven's Edge and quarantining them forever. Through the chaos, Tay caught Hana's eye. She looked scared but determined. They both knew the truth now. Humanity stood at a crossroads. They could embrace their heritage and risk becoming monsters again. They could reject it and remain ignorant forever. Or they could try to prove they had genuinely learned from their ancestors' failures. High Chancellor Raxel raised his crystalline arms, and silence gradually fell. This matter is too important for hasty decisions. We will adjourn and reconvene tomorrow. But know this, humans of Haven's Edge, the galaxy is watching. Your next choices will determine not just your fate, but possibly the fate of all civilization. As the delegates filed out, Tay remained behind with his closest companions. Dr. Mira, Hana, Commander Jin, Ambassador Quan, and Dr. Yuna gathered around him. Can we pass this test? Hana asked quietly. Tay looked at each of them in turn. I don't know, but I know we have to try. Our ancestors failed because they couldn't control their power. We need to show that we're different, that we've learned. What if we haven't? Commander Jin asked. What if we're just as flawed as they were? Then maybe, Dr. Mira said softly, maybe it's better that we fail. Better that humanity ends here than risk another war that destroys the galaxy. The weight of that truth settled over them like a heavy blanket. Somewhere deep in the archive, ancient systems waited for humanity's answer, and time was running out. The dreams started on the 5th night after the archive awakened. All across Haven's Edge, humans began experiencing vivid visions of places they had never been and events they had never witnessed. For most, they were just fragments, confusing flashes of light and sound. But for some, especially the younger ones, the visions were much more. Leah woke up screaming. She was 19 years old, a student who had always lived a quiet life helping her parents on their farm. Now she sat in her bed shaking, tears streaming down her face. She had just watched a city of glass towers burn. She had felt the heat on her skin as weapons tore through the sky. She had heard the screams of millions dying, and somehow she knew it was real. It was a memory, not hers, but passed down through her blood from ancestors 50,000 years dead. By morning, the medical center was overwhelmed. Dozens of young people were experiencing the same thing. Dr. Yuna worked frantically to understand what was happening, running scans and tests on everyone affected. "It's the genetic suppression breaking down," she explained to Ambassador Kwan and Dr. Mira. "When Tai activated the archive, it triggered something in human DNA. The modifications our ancestors made are unraveling. Ancestral memories encoded in our genes are surfacing." "Can you stop it?" Kwan asked, watching through the window as Leah sat in a corner, rocking back and forth, muttering about fire and death. "I don't know if we should stop it," Yuna admitted. "These memories might be important. They might help us understand what we're facing." Day arrived at the medical center looking for answers. At 30 years old, he had always been a skilled pilot, but lately his reflexes had become almost supernatural. He could react to things before they happened, as if his body knew what to do before his mind did. "Is this happening to me, too?" he asked. "Am I remembering things?" "In a way," Yuna said. "Your ancestors enhanced certain abilities in their descendants. Combat reflexes, spatial awareness, quick decision-making. These were survival traits. Now they're activating more strongly." Meanwhile, Tai and Hana were deep in the archive with Velthari and a small team of researchers. The massive underground complex seemed to go on forever, chamber after chamber filled with technology that still worked perfectly despite its age. "I don't understand," Hana said, examining a control panel. "If they wanted to forget everything, why preserve all this? Why not destroy it completely?" "Because they weren't certain they were right," Tay said. He had been interfacing with the archive systems, learning more with each connection. The last architects, they were divided even at the end. Some believed the great forgetting was necessary. Others thought it was cowardice. They compromised by sealing the knowledge rather than destroying it. A gift to their descendants, if those descendants proved worthy. Velthari studied a holographic display showing the extent of ancient human civilization. "I am trying to comprehend the scale of what your people built. Thousands of worlds, trillions of citizens, technology that makes our most advanced systems look like primitive tools. How did any species achieve so much?" "Time and obsession," Tay said quietly. "The records show humanity was driven by an insatiable need to understand everything, to master every challenge. That drive built an empire. It also destroyed them." Outside the archive, tensions were rising. General Korvax had convinced several species to position military vessels around Haven's Edge. Officially, they were there to observe and protect. In reality, everyone knew they were preparing for the possibility of having to destroy the human colony. Commander Jin watched the ships through his command center's view screen. His security forces were hopelessly outmatched. If those fleets decided to attack, Haven's Edge would be vaporized in minutes. He had to trust that diplomacy would work, but he also had to prepare for the worst. Ryuk, a 41-year-old farmer who lived on the outskirts of the main settlement, made a discovery that changed everything. While plowing his field, his equipment struck something solid underground. Curious, he dug deeper and found a sealed chamber. Inside was a small architect facility, much older than the main archive. When Ryuk touched the controls, they activated. Just like with Tai, the systems responded to his human genetics. But what he found inside made his blood run cold. Weapons. Designs for devices that could crack planets or ignite stars. The ancient humans had hidden weapons caches across Haven's Edge, insurance against any future threat. Ryuk immediately reported his find to Commander Jin, who ordered the chamber sealed. But the damage was done. The Concordance had sensors monitoring all Architect sites. They detected the activation. Within hours, the galaxy knew that humans had access to doomsday weapons. The summit reconvened in emergency session. The mood was hostile, bordering on panic. "This proves our concerns were justified," General Korvax declared. "Humans are awakening their ancestors' arsenal. We must act now, before it is too late." "We're not awakening anything," Ambassador Quan protested. "A farmer stumbled onto a buried facility. We've sealed it. We have no intention of using those weapons." "Intention is meaningless," Korvax replied. "You have access. That alone is unacceptable." High Chancellor Raxul tried to maintain order. "Perhaps this is why the test exists. The ancient humans knew their technology was dangerous. They created this trial to determine if their descendants could be trusted with such power." "Then let them take the test now," another delegate demanded. "We have waited long enough. Either humans prove themselves worthy, or we must take action to protect the galaxy." Back at the medical center, Leah had stopped screaming. Instead, she sat very still, her eyes distant. When Dr. Yuna approached, Leah spoke without looking at her. "I remember the test. My ancestors, they designed it. I can see it in my mind." "What do you see?" Yuna asked gently. 5 trials, Leah whispered. 5 impossible choices. They're meant to break you, to show you the cost of power. My ancestors failed them. Every single one. That's why the war happened. They chose power over wisdom, every single time. Tay was summoned from the archive. When he saw Leah, he understood immediately. The ancestral memories were strongest in her. She was becoming a bridge to the past, whether she wanted to be or not. "Can you help us?" he asked her. "Can you tell us how to pass the test?" Leah finally looked at him and her eyes were haunted. "That's the point. You can't. Not if you're trying to pass it. The test isn't about finding the right answers. It's about understanding that some power should never be used, no matter the cost. My ancestors couldn't accept that." "Can we?" Ambassador Quan made the announcement that evening. Humanity would attempt the test. 5 humans would enter the archive and face the trials designed by their ancestors. The test would begin in 3 days, giving them time to prepare. But there was a condition. If humanity failed, they would accept whatever judgment the Concordance imposed. Quarantine, observation, even destruction if necessary. The stakes could not be higher. Tay, Hana, and Leah were obvious choices. Tay for his knowledge, Hana for her skills, Leah for her connection to the past. The other 2 positions were filled by Yoon, a 36-year-old philosopher who had spent years studying ethics and morality, and Nari, a 35-year-old mother of 3 who represented the ordinary citizens of Haven's Edge. "Why me?" Nari asked when she was chosen. "I'm not special. I'm just a teacher." "That's exactly why," Ambassador Quan said. "We need someone who represents what humanity has become, not what we were. Someone who cares more about the future than the past." The 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Tay studied everything the archive would show him about the test. Hana designed equipment that might help them survive the trials. Yoon meditated and thought deeply about the ethical implications of the choices they might face. Leah tried to process the growing flood of ancestral memories that threatened to overwhelm her. Nari spent time with her children, not sure if she would see them again. On the final night, Velthari visited Tai in his quarters. "I have been studying your history," she said. "Your recent history, I mean. The 200 years since you achieved spaceflight. Do you know what I found remarkable? What? Tay asked. You didn't expand. Every other species, when they achieve the ability to travel between stars, they immediately begin colonizing, claiming territory, competing for resources. But humans stayed on Haven's edge. You built a society focused on quality rather than quantity. You chose community over empire. We thought that was normal, Tay said. It isn't, Velthari replied. It's extraordinary, and it gives me hope. Perhaps modern humans really are different from your ancestors. Perhaps you have learned something they never could. The morning of the test arrived. The 5 humans stood before the archive entrance. Behind them stood their families, friends, and colleagues. Above them, in orbit, hundreds of ships waited to see the outcome. Commander Jin gripped his weapon, knowing it was useless but needing the comfort anyway. Dr. Yuna monitored the genetic changes still rippling through the human population. Ambassador Quan stood straight and proud, hiding his terror. Dr. Mira watched her best student prepare to face the judgment of history. Are you ready? High Chancellor Raxul asked. Tay looked at his 4 companions. Hana gave him a nervous smile. Leah nodded, her eyes still distant. Yun looked calm and centered. Nari took a deep breath and squeezed his hand. We're ready, Tai said. They entered the archive together and the door sealed behind them. In the central chamber, the platform awaited. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing a simple message in human language. Welcome, children of Earth. Your ancestors destroyed themselves because they could not control their power. You have come seeking that same power. Before it is granted, you must prove you will not repeat their mistakes. 5 trials await. Pass them all, and the legacy of humanity will be yours. Fail even one, and this archive and everything in it will be destroyed. You have 1 week. Choose wisely. The first trial materialized before them, and Tay felt his stomach drop. It was worse than anything he had imagined, because the choice wasn't between right and wrong. It was between 2 terrible options, and either way, people would die. The test had begun. The first trial appeared as a holographic simulation, but everyone in the chamber could feel that it was much more than that. The archive could affect reality itself. Make the wrong choice, and real consequences would follow. A scenario unfolded before them. Haven's Edge was under attack by an unknown enemy force. The colony's shields were failing. 20,000 civilians would die within hours unless they acted. The archive offered them a weapon. An ancient architect defense system that would destroy the attacking fleet instantly and permanently protect the colony from any future threat. But there was a cost. The weapon required biological energy to function. It would drain the life force of 1,000 colonists, killing them instantly to power the shields that would save the other 19,000. This is insane, Hana said, staring at the holographic controls. Kill 1,000 to save 20,000? How is that a choice? It's exactly the kind of choice the architects faced, Yoon said quietly. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. It seems logical. That's what makes it dangerous. Leah was shaking. I remember this. Not this exact scenario, but situations like it. My ancestors justified terrible things with this logic. They told themselves that sacrificing some lives for greater good was necessary. Each time it became easier. Each time the number they were willing to sacrifice grew larger. Nari looked at the simulated attack, her teacher's mind working through the problem. Who chooses which 1,000 die? How do you pick? Age, health, lottery? And who gives us the right to make that choice for them? Tay approached the controls carefully. The weapon was real. He could feel the power humming through the archive. If they activated it, 1,000 real people on Haven's Edge would die. The simulation was a test of their willingness to use such a weapon, not just their ability to solve a problem. There has to be another way, he said. There isn't, the archive responded, its voice emotionless. The scenario parameters are fixed. The enemy cannot be negotiated with. The shields cannot hold. You must choose. Save 20,000 by sacrificing 1,000, or refuse and let all 20,000 die. You have 10 minutes to decide. Outside the chamber, on Haven's Edge's surface, people waited. They couldn't see what was happening inside, but they knew the trials had begun. Families held each other. Children asked questions their parents couldn't answer. Commander Jin watched his tactical displays, seeing the Concordance fleet positions shift slightly, moving into strike formation. Inside, the 5 humans argued. Hana insisted there must be a technical solution, something they could engineer. Yoon explored the ethics from every angle, trying to find moral justification for either choice. Leah warned them that this was how it started, how her ancestors began down the path of atrocity. 5 minutes remaining, the archive announced. We have to decide, Hana said desperately. If we don't choose, everyone dies. Then everyone dies, Nari said. Her voice was quiet but firm. Everyone turned to stare at her. What? Tai asked. Nari looked at the weapon controls with disgust. This isn't a defense system. It's a trap. Our ancestors built weapons that required sacrifice, and each sacrifice made the next one easier to justify. Eventually, they were sacrificing millions without hesitation. I won't take the first step down that path. Not for any reason. But the people, Hana began, are in a fake scenario, Nari interrupted. This is a test. The real question isn't whether we can make hard choices. It's whether we're wise enough to recognize that some weapons should never be used, even if the alternative is losing. Especially then. 30 seconds, the archive warned. Tay made his decision. He walked away from the controls. We refuse. We won't activate the weapon. If this was real, we would find another way or die trying. But we won't kill innocents to buy safety. The countdown reached 0. The holographic attack intensified, showing Haven's Edge burning. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the archive to declare their failure, for the fail-safe weapons to activate and destroy them all. Instead, the simulation faded. New text appeared. First trial passed. You have chosen wisdom over expedience. Your ancestors failed this test. They believed the ends always justified the means. You understand that some means corrupt any end. They had barely caught their breath when the second trial began. This one was different. The archive offered them knowledge, medical technology that could extend human lifespan indefinitely. Everyone on Haven's Edge could live forever, healthy and young. Disease would become a memory. Death could be postponed indefinitely. What's the catch? Hana asked suspiciously. The archive explained. The technology worked, but it would destabilize the entire galactic civilization. Every species would want it. Resources that were scarce would become impossible to obtain. Population explosions would devastate ecosystems. The social structures of 1,000 civilizations would collapse as the young stopped inheriting from the old, as the old accumulated power and wealth forever. So we get to live forever while the galaxy burns? Yoon summarized. The technology could be shared, the archive suggested. All species could benefit. Which would make the problems even worse, Leah said. Her ancestral memories were showing her what happened when the architects pursued immortality. My ancestors did this. They achieved biological immortality. It created a society where the oldest, most powerful individuals controlled everything forever. No new ideas, no change. Just stagnation protected by immortal tyrants. But think of what we could learn, Hana argued. With unlimited time, imagine the knowledge we could accumulate, the problems we could solve. We solve death, but create a living death for civilization, Nari said. My children deserve a future where they can grow, change, and eventually lead. Not one where my generation rules forever. This decision was harder, The temptation was real. Who didn't want more time? Who wouldn't want to save their loved ones from death? But they saw the trap. Immortality wasn't a gift. It was a poison that would corrupt any society that embraced it. "We refuse," Tay said again, though it hurt to say it. "Death gives meaning to life. We won't trade away the future for an eternal present." "Second trial passed," the archive confirmed. "Your ancestors pursued immortality and achieved it. They lived long enough to see everything they built turn to ashes. You understand that all things must end." The third trial appeared. This one made Hannah gasp. The archive offered technology that could read minds, perfect understanding between individuals. No more miscommunication, no more deception. Diplomatic relations would be flawless. Conflicts could be resolved before they began. Total transparency between all thinking beings. "This is incredible," Hannah breathed. "Think of what we could achieve with perfect communication." "Think of what we would lose," Yoon countered. "Privacy, the right to our own thoughts, mystery, the ability to change our minds without everyone knowing. This isn't communication, it's invasion." Leah was crying. "They used this. My ancestors developed this technology and used it on each other. They thought it would create peace. Instead, it created paranoia. Everyone could see everyone's darkest thoughts, secret fears, hidden hatreds. Things that should have stayed private became public. It didn't bring them together. It tore them apart." The temptation was strong, though. Perfect understanding could solve so many problems. But the cost was surrendering the most fundamental aspect of being an individual, the privacy of one's own mind. "No," Nari said firmly. "Thinking is the last free thing we have. We won't give that away." "Third trial passed," the archive announced. "Your ancestors violated the mind and wondered why trust died. You understand that some boundaries must never be crossed." The fourth trial was perhaps the most seductive. The archive showed them a device that could terraform worlds instantly. Desert planets could become gardens. Dead moons could bloom with life. Humanity could spread across the galaxy, creating paradise wherever they went. They would never face resource scarcity again. But the archive explained the cost. The technology worked by consuming existing ecosystems and rebuilding them according to human preferences. Native life forms, even non-sentient ones, would be eradicated. Countless species would go extinct to make room for human expansion. "Some of these worlds are already dead," Hannah argued. "No native life. We could terraform those without harming anyone." "And who decides what counts as life worth preserving?" Yoon asked. "Today we say sentient species are protected. Tomorrow we draw the line at complex animals. The day after, we decide plants don't matter. Where does it end?" Tay studied the technology carefully. "This is the tool they use to build their empire. Thousands of worlds reshaped for human comfort. They convinced themselves it was progress. But each world they changed was a small genocide. Death by death, species by species, until they'd sterilized whole sectors of the galaxy." Nari thought of her children playing in the forests of Haven's Edge. Those forests were full of native life that had evolved over billions of years. Strange plants and odd creatures that humans had learned to live alongside. "We don't need to reshape the universe in our image. We can learn to fit into it as it is." "Fourth trial passed," the archive confirmed. "Your ancestors tried to force the universe to conform to their desires. You understand that wisdom means accepting what is, not demanding what you wish could be." The five of them were exhausted. 4 trials passed, but each decision had taken a piece of them. They had refused immortality, perfect communication, absolute safety, and unlimited expansion. What was left? The 5th and final trial appeared, and it was the simplest and most difficult of all. The archive showed them a button, just a single control. Press it, and full access to all architect knowledge and technology would be granted immediately. Everything their ancestors had ever learned, every device they ever built, every secret of the universe they ever uncovered. Humanity would become gods overnight. They could reclaim their heritage, their rightful place as the greatest civilization in galactic history. They would have the power to protect themselves from any threat, to shape the galaxy according to their will, to never be vulnerable again. "This is what we came for," Hana said, staring at the button. "Is it?" Nari asked. The archive spoke. "Your ancestors stood at this same crossroads countless times. Each time they chose power. Each time they told themselves they would use it wisely. Each time they were wrong. You have passed 4 trials by choosing restraint. Now comes the final test. Will you choose differently than they did? Or will you repeat their greatest mistake, believing you will succeed where they failed?" Leah's ancestral memories flooded through her mind. She saw it all now. Every generation of architects had faced this choice. Every generation believed they were wiser than the last. Every generation chose power. And power corrupted them, every single time. The button glowed invitingly. One press, that's all it would take. They could save their people. They could prove humans deserved respect. They could reclaim everything their ancestors built, or they could walk away, leave the power buried, accept their limitations, choose to remain small, weak, and vulnerable, choose to trust in wisdom rather than might. Outside, the Concordance fleet prepared for either outcome. If the humans chose wrong, the order would be given. Haven's edge would burn. Inside the archive, 5 humans stared at a button and contemplated the future of their species. Time seemed to stop in the archive chamber. The glowing button sat before them, containing within it the accumulated knowledge of 50,000 years. Everything humanity had lost. Everything they could become again. Hana reached toward it, her engineer's mind already racing with possibilities. So many problems they could solve. So much good they could do. "Wait," Tay said, catching her wrist gently. "Think about what we've learned. Every trial has been about recognizing that power has costs, about understanding that some prices are too high to pay. But we passed those trials," Hana argued. "We proved we're different from our ancestors. Maybe we've earned the right to this knowledge." "Have we?" Yoon asked quietly. "Or have we simply learned to say no to obvious traps? This is the real test. Not whether we can refuse weapons that require sacrifice, but whether we can refuse power itself." Leah sank to the floor, her head in her hands. The ancestral memories were overwhelming her now. She could see it all. Generation after generation of architects standing at similar crossroads. "They always thought they were different too," she whispered. "Each generation looked at their parents' mistakes and swore they would do better. And each generation fell into the same trap. They believed they deserved power because they understood its dangers." Nari walked away from the button, moving to the edge of the chamber. She looked up at the ceiling, thinking about her children playing above ground. "I've been a teacher for 15 years, she said. "I've watched children grow, and you know what I've learned? The wisest children aren't the ones who know the most. They're the ones who know what they don't know, who understand their own limits." "So we just give up?" Hana asked, frustration clear in her voice. "We walk away from everything? Leave humanity weak and vulnerable? The Concordance has weapons. Every other species has advantages we don't. We'll always be at their mercy." "Maybe that's not the worst thing," Nari replied. "Maybe being vulnerable means we have to cooperate instead of dominate. Maybe weakness teaches lessons that strength never can." Tay closed his eyes, thinking through everything they had discovered. The archive wasn't just a test of humanity. It was a gift from ancestors who had learned too late the difference between knowledge and wisdom. They had arranged this trial not to grant power to those who proved worthy, but to teach their descendants the most important lesson of all. "I think I understand now," he said slowly. "Our ancestors didn't fail because they weren't smart enough or strong enough. They failed because they couldn't accept being small. They couldn't accept that there are limits that shouldn't be crossed, questions that shouldn't be answered, powers that shouldn't be wielded. Not because they lacked ability, but because they lacked the wisdom to refuse." Outside the archive, Ambassador Quan watched the chronometer. Hours had passed since the 5 humans entered. Reports from around Haven's Edge showed the entire colony holding its breath. Some prayed to gods they barely believed in. Others simply waited in silence. Commander Jin received a communication from the Concordance fleet. General Korvax demanded to know what was happening. The delay was making them nervous. Jin had no answers to give. Dr. Yuna monitored the biometric data from the 5 humans inside. Their stress levels were extreme. Leah's readings in particular were alarming. The ancestral memories were pushing her mind to its limits. Inside the chamber, Yoon spoke. "There's a story from ancient Earth philosophy. A teacher offers his student all the knowledge in the world. The student reaches for it eagerly. The teacher pulls it away and asks, 'If you possess all knowledge, what will you spend your life pursuing?' The student realizes that having all answers means having no questions. And a life without questions is a life without purpose." "So we're supposed to choose ignorance?" Hana challenged. "That's not wisdom, that's cowardice." "No," Nari said firmly. "We're choosing humility. We're choosing to build our future through our own efforts, our own mistakes, our own learning. Not by standing on the shoulders of ancestors who destroyed themselves. We're choosing to be small, limited, and human. Actually human, not gods pretending to be human." Leah looked up, tears streaming down her face. "They're proud of you, you know. My ancestors. I can feel it in the memories. They hoped their descendants would be strong enough to refuse what they couldn't. They wanted us to break the cycle." Hana stared at the button, her hand still extended. Everything in her training, her education, her entire worldview said to press it. Knowledge was power. Technology was progress. Advancement was the goal of civilization. But she thought about the last 200 years of human history. Haven's Edge hadn't built an empire. They had built a community. They hadn't conquered worlds. They had learned to live in harmony with one world. They hadn't accumulated power. They had accumulated wisdom. Slowly, she lowered her hand. "I think," she said quietly, "that maybe being human means knowing when to stop reaching, when to say, 'This is enough.' Our ancestors never learned that lesson. Maybe that's what makes us different. Not that we're smarter or better, but that we're humble enough to accept our limits." Tay stepped forward and spoke to the archive directly. "We refuse. Not because we're afraid of power, but because we respect it too much to claim it. Our ancestors destroyed themselves chasing godhood. We choose to remain human, small, limited, mortal, and human." For a long moment, nothing happened. The button continued to glow invitingly. Then slowly, it faded. The archive spoke, and for the first time there was emotion in its voice. Pride, relief, perhaps even love. Final trial passed. You have succeeded where your ancestors failed across thousands of generations. You understand that true wisdom is not knowing everything, but knowing what not to know. The full archive will remain sealed, but your choice has earned a different gift. The chamber transformed. New displays appeared, showing carefully curated knowledge. Medical technology that healed without cost. Clean energy systems that worked with nature rather than against it. Agricultural methods that could feed populations without depleting soil. Space travel that was safer and more efficient. Engineering principles that created without destroying. This knowledge is freely given, the archive explained. It carries no curse because it seeks no dominion. It will not make you gods. It will simply help you be better humans. Use it wisely. Share it freely with other species. Let it be a gift to the galaxy, not a weapon against it. And the rest? Tay asked. The weapons? The reality-warping technology? All the dangerous knowledge? Will remain sealed until it is no longer dangerous, perhaps forever. Perhaps your descendants, 10,000 generations from now, will be ready. But that is for them to decide, not you. You have chosen for your generation. That is enough. The archive doors opened. The 5 humans emerged into daylight, blinking in the sun. The entire colony seemed to be waiting outside. Ambassador Quan rushed forward. What happened? Did you... We passed, Nari said simply, but not by taking what was offered, by refusing it. The news spread across Haven's Edge and up to the Concordance fleet. General Korvax was stunned. They refused? They had the power of the architects in their hands and said no? High Chancellor Raxel's crystalline form seemed to glow brighter. It appears humanity has taught us all a lesson today. Perhaps the measure of a civilization is not what power it can claim, but what power it can refuse. The fleet began withdrawing. The threat had passed. But more than that, humanity's choice had sparked something unexpected. Other species began re-examining their own pursuits of power. The Concordance established new councils to discuss the ethics of technology. Humanity's refusal became a touchstone for galactic philosophy. Over the following months, humans began implementing the knowledge the archive had released. Hana led engineering teams that designed new starships based on architect principles. But these weren't weapons or empire builders. They were exploration vessels, trading ships, vessels meant for connection rather than conquest. Dr. Yuna used the medical knowledge to eliminate diseases that had plagued Haven's Edge. But she worked with alien doctors to ensure the treatments were safe for all species. The knowledge was shared freely, just as the archive had intended. Leah recovered slowly from the trauma of ancestral memories. She worked with Velthari and other alien scholars to create a comprehensive history of the architects. Not a celebration of their power, but an honest accounting of their failures. A warning to all civilizations about the dangers of unchecked ambition. Tay remained the keeper of the archive. He spent his days studying the released knowledge and protecting the sealed sections, but more importantly, he taught. Students from dozens of species came to learn from him, not about architect technology, but about the philosophy that had saved humanity from repeating their ancestors' mistakes. Commander Jin transformed Haven's Edge's security forces into a new organization. Working with the Concordance, they established joint teams to protect architect sites across the galaxy. Not to exploit them, but to preserve them as reminders of what could go wrong when power became an end rather than a means. Day became captain of the first human exploration vessel. His enhanced reflexes made him an excellent pilot, but he used his abilities to help others rather than dominate them. He mapped trade routes, rescued stranded ships, and built connections between isolated colonies. Nari went back to teaching. Her classroom became famous across the galaxy when the story of the trials spread. Other species sent observers to understand how humans educated their young. They found something unexpected. Humans taught wisdom alongside knowledge, questions alongside answers, humility alongside achievement. Ambassador Quan became a major voice in Concordance politics. His proposal for a wisdom council was adopted. Now, before any species could deploy potentially dangerous technology, it had to be reviewed not just for functionality, but for long-term consequences. Humanity's choice had changed how the galaxy approached progress itself. 10 years after the trials, a ceremony was held at the archive. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered. They erected a monument, not to the architect's power, but to modern humanity's wisdom. The inscription was simple. Here, humanity remembered their past and chose their future. They were offered godhood and chose humanity instead. They were offered all answers and chose to keep asking questions. They were offered unlimited power and chose restraint. May all civilizations learn from their example. The greatest strength is knowing when not to reach for more. Tay stood before the monument with his 4 companions. They were older now, marked by their experience but not broken by it. Hana had gray in her hair. Yoon had lines around his eyes from years of thoughtful contemplation. Leah had scars that were invisible but real, memories of a past she carried for her entire species. Nari's children stood beside her, teenagers now, representing the future humanity had chosen to protect. "Do you ever regret it?" Hana asked quietly. "Refusing the power?" Tay looked around at the gathered species, at the humans mingling freely with aliens, at the ships overhead representing cooperation rather than conquest. "No," he said. "Our ancestors reached for godhood and lost their humanity. We reached for humanity and found something better. Community, purpose, connection, things no amount of power could provide." That night, as the celebrations continued, Tay returned to the archive alone. He placed his hand on the sealed section, feeling the vast power that hummed behind those barriers. Knowledge that could reshape reality. Technology that could grant wishes. Power beyond imagination. And he felt no temptation to open it, because he understood now what his ancestors never learned. Power wasn't the answer to anything. It was just another question. And humanity had learned to ask better questions. He thought about the future. His students would teach others. Humanity would continue to grow, slowly and carefully, learning as they went. They would make mistakes, certainly, but they would make them as themselves, not as pale shadows of ancestors, too powerful for their own good. The archive's voice spoke softly, for him alone. "You have given your descendants a precious gift. Not knowledge, but the wisdom to use it well. Your ancestors would be proud." "I hope so," Tay whispered. "I hope we've broken the cycle. I hope we've shown that it's possible to have knowledge without arrogance, ability without dominance, progress without destruction." "Time will tell," the archive replied, "but you have given your species the best chance they have ever had. You chose the harder path. The path of restraint and humility. That is true courage." Tay left the archive and walked back to the celebration. Above, stars filled the sky. Somewhere out there were thousands of worlds, trillions of beings, countless possibilities. Humanity was small in that vast universe, limited, vulnerable, mortal, and that was exactly as it should be, because they had learned the most important lesson in the galaxy, that being human was enough. They didn't need to be gods. They just needed to be wise, kind, and humble. Everything else would follow. The archive hummed quietly in its chamber, its duty fulfilled. The test was passed, the cycle was broken, and humanity, the lost ancient race rediscovered, had finally found their way home. Not to the power of their past, but to the promise of their future. A future built not on dominion, but on wisdom. Not on conquest, but on connection. Not on being more, but on being enough. And that made all the difference.